The air that afternoon held a strange stillness, not the peace of a quiet home, but the hush before a confession no one dares to hear. In the halls of Cumnor Place, the light moved slowly, slanting through glass that had seen too many winters. Dust drifted in the sunbeams like the restless souls of those who once believed in mercy. And there she stood, Amy Dudley, wife to a man the Queen could not stop loving. Her gown, dark as river silt, trailed behind her, pooling at her feet like a dying sea. Silent, endless, waiting to swallow her whole. They said she was unwell, that her mind had begun to wander down corridors no priest could follow, that her prayers no longer reached heaven, but others whispered differently. They said Amy had begun to see what she was never meant to, that she had glimpsed the truth hidden behind velvet curtains and royal vows, the truth that love, in the Tudor court, was never gentle, never sacred, and never free. Love there was a weapon, and Amy Dudley was running out of ways to defend herself. The house was empty, her servants, gone to the village fair, by her own insistence. She had told them to go, her voice soft but final, as though she knew what silence she was buying. Now that silence wrapped itself around her like a shroud, the clock had stopped hours ago. The air smelled of wax and wood and something faintly metallic, the scent of endings, a sound, a creak of timber, quick as breath, sharp as fear. She turned, her pulse quickening, her eyes searching the empty stairwell behind her. Nothing. Nothing but the weight of her own thoughts, pressing like unseen hands at her back. If she had been mad, then madness had chosen its moment perfectly. If she had been sane, then someone else had. And somewhere, though no one would admit it, someone was waiting for the sound. Her lips parted, trembling, not in fear, but in resignation. A prayer without words, a woman's last conversation with fate. "If I fall," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her, "let them remember me as I stood." The light caught her face. A single tear, a single heartbeat, a single hesitation before gravity and history claimed her together. A shadow shifted, the faintest motion, a breath, a thought, a decision. And then the world tilted, a gasp, sharp, fleeting, the sound of silk against stone, bone against eternity. Silence followed, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls, filling the air where her life had been. The candle trembled, its flame bowing once before surrendering to the dark. Somewhere a door closed softly, or perhaps it was just the house exhaling. Later they would come and find her, lying at the foot of the stairs, her neck broken, her eyes open, staring at something no living soul could see. They would call it an accident. They would speak of grief and frailty, of nerves and missteps and divine will. But every beam in that house, every nail, every stone, they knew better. They had heard the whisper that came before the fall. They had felt the tremor of guilt that followed. For some falls are clumsy. Other, they're orchestrated by hands that never touch, by orders never spoken, by desires too dangerous to name. The dust, disturbed by her body's final motion, danced once more in the light. And if you had been there, just for a moment, you might have sworn you heard it too. The faintest sigh from the stairs, a whisper caught between this world and the next. Not the sound of a woman dying, but the sound of history beginning to lie. Night had folded itself around Greenwich like a confession kept too long. The palace slept, but the river did not. It whispered below the windows, silver and merciless, carrying secrets downstream toward the sea. Robert Dudley stood there, framed by moonlight, the weight of power and sin balanced between his shoulders. In his hand, a letter, a simple piece of parchment that could shatter kingdoms. The ink was still wet, the words still bleeding. They had told him his wife was dead. "My lord, your wife, Lady Amy. She is dead." 6 words, neat, polite, rehearsed. The kind of sentence that sounds like mercy until you listen too closely. His fingers trembled once, just once, enough to betray the man behind the title. He exhaled, slow, deliberate, as though trying to breathe out the memory of her name. Was it grief that pressed at his chest? Or the sudden, sharp taste of freedom? The truth is a fragile thing. It shivers when you stare at it too long. They said he loved her once, and perhaps he did, in the way a man loves what does not yet stand between him and a crown. But love in the Tudor court was never measured by tenderness. It was weighed in whispers, priced in secrets, and bartered in rooms where prayers went unanswered. In those halls, affection was a liability, and loyalty was currency. Robert Dudley understood both too well. He was the Queen's favorite, the sun that warmed her heart and burned her conscience. Every glance, every smile, every silence between them had been a scandal in waiting. And while the world watched, one woman, quiet, unseen, carried the burden of their ambition. Amy. The name lingered like a ghost between syllables, soft and accusing. Did he weep for her? Number. Not then. He folded the letter with a care that bordered on reverence, as though precision could make the act clean. Each crease was a boundary, each motion controlled. For in this court, grief was not a luxury, it was a performance. And he, ever the master of appearances, knew exactly how much sorrow to show and how much to hide. Outside, the Thames shimmered beneath the moon, calm on the surface, ruthless beneath, much like him. He watched the water and saw his reflection fractured by ripples, a face divided, husband, lover, courtier, suspect. In that moment, perhaps he wondered whether the river could wash it all away. The lies, the longing, the stain of convenience disguised as tragedy. He loved her once, they would say later, but love, as history will remind us, is a currency easily spent in a court built on ambition. And ambition, that old, patient serpent, had been coiling around him for years, whispering promises too intoxicating to resist. The Queen's favor, the power behind the throne, the impossible dream of a crown shared between sinner and sovereign. Amy's death, then, was not the end of love. It was its price. And as he stared into the night, the moonlight painted his face in the pale color of regret. Not for what had been lost, but for what could finally be gained. The river below sighed. The candle at his desk guttered. Somewhere far away, bells tolled for the dead, and the living pretended not to hear. Morning came to Whitehall not as light, but as judgment. The sun did not rise that day. It accused. Its pale glow bled through the lattice windows, spilling across polished marble floors and faces painted in powder and fear. The Queen's court was awake, yet no one truly spoke. They moved like ghosts inside golden cages. Every rustle of silk, every flicker of glance. Another verse in a prayer no one dared to finish. A fall, they whispered. The words slid across the corridors, light as breath, heavy as sin. A fall? No woman dies so neatly, someone murmured behind a fan, eyes glinting like daggers beneath a smile. And so it began, the slow unmaking of truth. Rumor, that invisible weapon, moved faster than any messenger, found doors that even loyalty could not close. It slithered through the tapestries, across gold and velvet, until it reached the throne itself. For in the Tudor court, rumor was not a whisper. It was law in its first draft. And each voice that spoke her name, each tongue that shaped the word Amy, drew a new wound in a queen already bleeding. They said Lady Dudley had fallen down the stairs, but the courtiers' eyes said otherwise. Too convenient, they thought. Too sudden. Too useful. The kind of death that clears a path. The kind of tragedy that changes everything. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Henry, mistress of England, the Virgin Queen, stood at the heart of it all, still as stone before her mirror. The reflection that stared back was not her own. It was older, paler, crowned by guilt instead of gold. The mirror was honest in a way her court could never be. It showed her what history would one day remember, a monarch torn between throne and heart, between the living and the dead. If I believe him innocent, she whispered to her reflection, then I become guilty. And that was the truth none dared speak aloud. Because innocence in Whitehall was not the absence of sin, it was merely the art of surviving it. The Queen had learned to rule a nation, to silence men with a glance, to make the world bow to her will. But she could not silence her own heart, nor the echo of a woman's fall that rang through every corridor like a ghost still searching for justice. Behind the velvet and music, the courtiers feasted on tragedy. Each morsel of gossip tasted sweet with danger. "Did he love her?" one whispered. "Did he push her?" another breathed. And then the most poisonous question of all. "Did the queen know?" Those words rippled through Whitehall like a stone cast into still water. Quiet at first, but unstoppable. Elizabeth heard them, even when she pretended not to. She felt them behind every curtsy, every careful compliment. She felt them in the stillness of night, when the palace grew silent, and the only sound left was the beating of her own treacherous heart. The air itself seemed to conspire against her, perfumed, perfidious, thick with secrets that refused to stay buried. And so she stood before the mirror, Queen of England, daughter of execution, lover of a man whose wife lay broken at the bottom of a staircase, the glass fogged with her breath, as though the truth itself tried to hide from her. She ruled a nation, they would say, yet could not rule her own heart. But no one would add the rest, that no one ever truly rules the heart. It is a crown too heavy, forged not from gold, but from longing, from guilt, from the unspoken knowledge that every throne is built upon a grave. And somewhere beneath all that splendor, in the quiet hum of power and perfume, the whispers continued. Rumor, the one thing more enduring than love and more deadly than truth. They laid her out on a table of oak, not a bed for rest, but for reckoning. The walls of Cumnor Place had seen many things, but never silence so heavy. Not even the air dared move. Amy Dudley lay still, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her eyes open, not in terror, but in question. It was as though she had died in the middle of a thought that history would spend centuries trying to finish. Her skin was pale, the color of wax, her lips slightly parted, as if to say one last word, one that no one in the room would dare hear. The coroner stood over her, quill ready, eyes cold. He was a man who had seen death before, but not this kind. Not the kind that stared back at him and asked for justice. "The verdict," he said, his voice steady, his hand unmoved. "Death by misfortune." Misfortune! Such a polite word for murder. A word men use when the truth is too expensive. And in this room, truth was indeed costly. Too costly for nobles, for crowns, for the fragile architecture of power built on lies and silk. The ink dried quickly on the parchment, sealing her fate in tidy handwriting, as if neatness could make it clean. No one spoke. No one breathed. The only sound was the slow drip of wax from a candle burning low. The kind of sound that marks time only for the dead. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying whispers from the village. That she had been pushed, that she had jumped, that she had been erased. But inside these walls, silence had already taken its oath. The coroner bowed his head, not in reverence, but in relief. The truth was heavier than any body, and in the Tudor world, men did not carry what could crush them. The camera, if there had been one, would have lingered, tracing her stillness, the soft curve of her hand resting over her chest, the way her hair spilled like sunlight that would never rise again. And then, slowly, the gaze would turn, away from her face, toward the staircase. There on the final step, a single droplet of blood, small, dark, and certain, remained. It had dried days ago, yet refused to fade. A witness that could not speak, a memory that would not die. Centuries later, that house would crumble. The walls would fall, the roof would rot. But that stain, that tiny mark of violence, would linger, outliving its witnesses, outlasting even the name of the woman who left it there. Because some truths, though buried, refused to decay. The parchment might have said misfortune, but the blood said otherwise. It said there had been struggle, that she had not gone quietly, that there had been a moment, brief, fierce, where she realized what was being taken from her, and she tried to stop it. And though her voice had been silenced, her blood spoke the only word that mattered. Remember. The candle flickered once, then surrendered, smoke curling upward like a final plea to heaven. Outside, the night resumed its stillness. The coroner's quill rested. The verdict stood. Misfortune, they wrote. But history, patient as ever, was already sharpening its quill to write another word. Murder. Night had wrapped itself around Whitehall, not in darkness, but in gold. Inside the Queen's chamber, the fire burned low. The only witness to a conversation that would never be recorded. The air shimmered with heat and guilt. Gold tapestries glowed like the walls of heaven, and yet within them, two souls knelt in hell. Robert Dudley was on his knees, not before his monarch, but before the only woman who could damn or forgive him. His voice trembled with the weight of something he could not name. "I did not kill her," he said, and perhaps he spoke the truth, or perhaps he spoke it too late. For in this palace, truth was not what happened. It was what could be believed. Elizabeth stood motionless. The firelight caught her crown, scattering its glow across her pale face like fragments of broken faith. "Then why?" she whispered, her voice sharp enough to wound. "Does it feel like we both did?" The silence that followed was not peace. It was punishment. Even the flames seemed to hesitate, crackling softly, accusingly, as if they too remembered Amy Dudley's final breath. Some loves burn bright enough to scorch even the innocent. But this was no ordinary love. It was forged in ambition, baptized in secrecy, and crowned in blood. Theirs was the kind of love the world could never see without wanting to destroy it, and so they hid it, behind duty, behind politics, behind the pretense of chastity. Yet every lie they told for love became a prayer answered by ruin. Dudley bowed his head, not as a subject, but as a man unmade. He had everything a man could want, a queen's affection, a nation's envy, and yet he would forever kneel before the memory of a woman who no longer had a voice. Elizabeth turned from him. The tears caught in her eyes sparkled like jewels. The cruel irony of a crown that cannot protect the heart beneath it. Once a queen's heart is burned, the ashes never fade. Power had given her everything, except the freedom to love without consequence. And so she wore her sorrow as she wore her jewels, publicly, beautifully, and unbearably heavy. The room was thick with things unsaid. Between them hung the ghost of Amy Dudley, unseen but undeniable. The third presence in every glance, every silence, every breath. If Dudley was guilty of anything, it was of loving the one woman who could never be his. And if Elizabeth was guilty, it was of loving him despite the body that now lay between them. Outside, the night wind brushed against the palace walls, carrying the scent of river mist and repentance. The fire hissed once, a sigh or a curse. In that moment, history leaned in to listen, for this was not a confession, it was a coronation of guilt. And though no one else would ever hear the words, the walls remembered. The stones remembered. They remembered a queen who ruled a world, yet was ruled by one man's silence. They remembered a man who swore he did not kill, but could never prove he was innocent. And they remembered how love, once lit, can burn through every oath, every lie, every heart, until only the smoke remains. The weeks passed, but the house did not forget. Cumnor Place stood in silence, its stones heavy with secrets, its air tasting faintly of smoke and prayer. The villagers said the wind had changed since that night. It no longer whistled through the halls. It sighed, as if the house itself had begun to mourn. Inside, dust settled where voices used to live. The grand hall was empty now, save for a single candle, still burning, flickering at the foot of the stair where she fell. Its flame wavered like a heartbeat, defiant, trembling, alive. They said her soul never left this place, that she walks the stairs when the moon is high, her steps too soft to hear, her shadow too faint to see. But sometimes when the night is quiet enough, the wood creaks and the air turns colder by a breath, and someone swears they feel her hand brush past. Not angry, not lost, just searching for the truth that died with her. The maid who entered that morning with a broom thought she was alone. She hummed a tune to calm herself. The kind of tune you sing to keep the dead from listening. But halfway across the hall she stopped. The air changed, thin, hollow, reverent, And when she looked toward the stair, she saw it, a shadow moving, slow, deliberate, ascending, not falling. She dropped the broom. It clattered against the floor, the sound echoing far too long, as though the house wanted to remember it. Then came the wind, sudden, certain, sweeping through the cracks of the old walls, finding the candle and snuffing it out. Darkness returned, but the darkness did not feel empty. Outside, the fog crept in from the fields, swallowing the manor whole, as if mercy itself had come too late. And somewhere beyond that fog, a rider moved through the mist. Robert Dudley, alone, cloaked, his face pale beneath the dawn's first light. He did not look back. The hooves of his horse beat a steady rhythm, a prayer or a sentence. It was hard to tell which. Behind him, Cumnor Place vanished, not burned, not fallen, just forgotten. But the fog is kind only to the living. The dead it remembers. History will call it an accident. But history, like the fog, has its loyalties. It spares those who survive. It edits the guilty into saints and buries the innocent beneath polite words and royal decrees. It will write of a fall, of misfortune, of sorrow without blame. But history will never write of the silence that followed, or of the way that silence still breathes. For some stories are too heavy for ink, and some ghosts too proud to rest. So when the wind stirs the old fields near Oxfordshire, and the moon casts its long, silver hand across the ruins, listen closely. You might hear footsteps, soft, careful, eternal, climbing the stairs again. Not to fall, but to remind the world that she never truly did. Because the dead do not fade when they are forgotten. They fade when they are forgiven. And Amy Dudley, poor, patient, persistent Amy, has never been forgiven.